Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.
All right, welcome to another Detroit is Different podcast recording. This one, as you hear the echo, you hear the feel, we are in full effect in the urban network. So this is Detroit is Different on the road, collaborating for a day of racial equity and racial healing. This is connected to an initiative that has been something that the nation itself has been doing, that's gone international, and we're entering a discussion about what racial healing and equity looks like in community development. I am here at the Urban Network with the mind behind the Urban Network, Yusef Shakur. Yusef, how you feeling?
Feeling good brother.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So without any further ado, let's get right into what we're here to talk about by you introducing the Urban Network in the space. So can you please give a breakdown in introducing yourself, speak to the work of the Urban Network, and in what ways do you connect the community in developing this space?
So introducing myself, again, my name is Yusef Shakur. I'm a native of this neighborhood. I grew up literally right down the street. My mother still stays there. So out of that experience of being a former gang member, growing up in this area, experiencing the highs, the lows, the good, the bad, the ugly, all that had shaped me. And shaping me, it inspired me coming home out of prison to want to do something positive back in my community. And that initiative started with the annual backpack event, and then in the process it evolved to where we got a storefront where we was hosting an open mic, a bookstore, where that evolved into a cafe / community center that we named the Urban Network. We ran that for like 4 years. It was located on Grand River in McGraw. We hosted a poetry series. It was the thing to be. It was brought a cross section of different people together right in the neighborhood, and always wanted to continue that vision. We was forced to close. And so where we at now in this house, it was given to me. And just adding some context, again, a majority of Detroit in my lifetime has been predominantly black. And for a lot of us, except for a few areas. And there was a white gentleman who had bought this house. He lived in here for a couple of years. He did the basics just to be able to get by. And he was catching a little hell from his neighbors, where they were just harassing him, little stupid stuff, breaking in, and to the point where he just got demoralized. But in that process, he got aware of the work that we did, and so instead of leaving on a bad note, he was like, "Man, I appreciate what you're doing. Here, you can have this house." And I can have what? And at the time, I was like, it was a good thing because the Urban Network, the original Urban Network, was forced to close, which I was really down and sad. And like, what I'm gonna do next? And then I realized like the building may be closed, but the concept could fit here. So we went into work. This has been a 5-year long process. We're not yet on our completion. We're looking to be open by the summertime.
All right, and with that, introducing myself, Khary Frazier. Many people are already familiar with Detroit is Different. This is also a public forum, so many people are connecting. My work with Detroit is Different is connecting different people to a message of community and what community exists through this forum right here, podcasting, and speaking to podcasting. What is podcasting and how people connect to it is their own way. It takes place at the Detroit is Different incubator. It is a home that I own, and the home that I own is a space now that is exclusively for creating ideas and building content. Building that content from people's creativity is the perspective that it stands on. So connected to just Detroit is Different now, it's many different podcasts where people have their own voices and platforms to express themselves in a way where they have conviction, That's what I stand on, and them believing in, and definitely a perspective, and expanding this idea of not just something online. It also has taken form in a festival that takes place now. Actually, the guy that hosts in my community, Josh, is here, that has the space, the Andy space, that is another community space that we connect with. So the ways I connect with community in developing Detroit is Different, the incubator, is allowing people a place to express their voice through what I have a passion for, and that is media and creating content. And that moves us straight to the first question. In what ways should philanthropists and foundations partner in the community to build neighborhoods? Now, this is the first question we have, but let me give a little bit of context before we get into the first question. Community development itself, defined as a process where community members come together to take collective action and generate solutions to common problems that exist inside the community. That's one definition. There's actually a whole course that connects this, and connecting to this course through UAD Mercy, it's different ideas. Community development can both be an occupation, and it also can be a way of volunteerism. Community development involves changing relationships between ordinary people and people in positions of power so that everyone can take part in issues that affect their lives. It starts from the principle that within any community, there's a wealth of knowledge and experience which is used in creative ways and can be channeled into collective action to achieve community's desired goals. Community development practitioners work alongside people in communities to help build relationships with key people and organizations to identify common concerns. So these are some of the things we're going to talk about in this discussion, the problems that actually exist in a neighborhood and how you solve them, and then really how we even identify them, and the difference between the idea of resident inclusion versus a resident-led problem solution. So we're very aware of the challenges in many communities, especially communities like the city of Detroit. And when we talk about racial equity, a city with still over 80% Black population, a lot of the community development-led projects and partnerships, initiatives, programs, projects are not inclusive of the residents and many Black people, or Black people that actually live inside these communities. So we see some of the challenges, and a lot of this is a complete, whether it be through ignorance, whether it be through intentionality, misunderstandings of the diagnosis of how these are challenges and how people do live in these communities. Question number one goes right into two of the primary, I guess, people that provide or targets of resources to address community development, and that is philanthropists and foundations. Many foundations take part and play out in a lot of the quote unquote community change and community development throughout the city of Detroit, and many cities alike. That's the first question that I have, and I lay to you, Yusef. In what ways should philanthropists and foundations partner in community development to build neighborhoods?
Wow. So listening to your question, I immediately think about like development itself. Many people in neighborhoods have desired, prayed for, and dreamed about development. They welcome development. The problem in development that occurs is it has no community input. It's imposed upon the people. And it's imposed upon because of the dynamics around the economics to it. I mean, community development is what it is. It's really a business. It's a business opportunity to create wealth, and that wealth does not reflect the community. And versus, so for foundations and philanthropy, and even adding on corporations, they should come in with from the position of recognizing those individuals who are there, their sweat equity, 3, 4, 5 generations is wealth. Mm-hmm. You should be able to honor and respect that, and that should invite people to the table. And what happens though, they bring in the big planners, with all these fancy words and 3 letters behind their name. But again, what we don't, like using my neighborhood for example, you see the dilapidation, you see the emptiness, but what you don't see is the lack of the de-investment. There's been a series of de-investment in this community that's contribute to the deterioration of the neighborhood. I mean, we had one of the strongest. I mean, you went there, Northwestern High School. It was one of the premier high schools in the city of Detroit, probably in the state of Michigan in terms of what it offered. You know, that was scaled down. We have a middle school that was built we had a middle school that was built in the 80s that now functioned as a police academy. No one chose to come and knock on our door and say, hey, what do you guys think about us closing your middle school? And we're gonna turn it into a police academy. Our elementary school was closed. I mean, all the writing was on the wall in terms of deteriorating or accelerating the deterioration. Then on the east end of our neighborhood, Henry Ford Hospital has purchased majority of those properties, and they've created their own vision. Again, I talk about it very passionately. They're currently building a cancer center. I mean, everybody in this room has wrestled with cancer, or in terms of probably know a family member or friend who has been impacted by it. But what doesn't get discussed is the social cancer that they've contributed. What I mean by the social cancer, that they purchased homes, that they've allowed to sit there and brought down the quality of the community. And again, when you look at big business, where it comes down, now they have the opportunity to purchase up these things. So even Henry Ford, like there's some in their name, and then also they have small little companies. I mean, as a nonprofit organization that's in the medical field, they have an urban planner. They also have a community liaison, and which is, again, they're expanding their outreach for their business that is excluding people, and you would think that would be counterproductive to the business that they're in, which is the health business. But you create, because of their business practice of invading communities, they've created a hazard.
Mm-hmm. So when you speak to this specifically, and this is very specific, and we welcome anybody here. If you'd like to approach the microphone with a question or a comment, you're more than welcome now. But Henry Ford is definitely something we can speak to, in the expansion of what's happening with Henry Ford and that partnership with local government and even state government and federal government in some ways, that has superseded the inclusion of many of the residents, like your mother, that have been here for generations. The next question in this becomes, how can residents hold organizations accountable for racial equity?
So that's a tricky question. And the reason I say it's a tricky, the answer to it's tricky, because again, when you examine, when you look at this neighborhood specifically, I'll be 47 next month. So when you look at in 47 years, our community, our neighborhood, more specific, is fractured. We've lost over 50% of our population. We no longer have a serious population of homeowners. If you remove the 2 apartment buildings out of our neighborhood, we probably will have less than 1,500 people in the neighborhood. You know, again, we've always struggled with employment. So when you add all those things up, it works against any ability to organize, because right now your organizing is centered around making sure you got lights on, making sure, again, there's no more schools where your kids can just go walk to the school and come home. Now you gotta figure out how to get your kids half a mile away. I mean, also looking at, like, there's no grocery store in walking proximity. I mean, these are the challenges. So being able to stabilize, like we're our heart is beating so fast that we have to calm it down. And once we have to calm it down in terms of, collectively gathering ourselves and creating values that we see ourselves as a community, because what happens, they pick us off. They'll come, hey, Khary, when I mean they, you're talking about organizations such as Henry Ford and others, they'll select you as the leader. And because of your interests, which may not represent the interests of the community, it divides the community or the neighborhood. And these are some of the fundamental things that we have to stop. So right now what we're doing is, because of the annual backpack event, this is our 14th year doing it, And because of a lot of the different challenges and changes over the neighborhood, we created a place where we're bringing people together and fundamentally, drawing the line, saying like through this process, the interests of our neighborhood should succeed any other thing. Like whatever I may do as an individual should not be greater than my neighborhood. And that's where fundamentally we can't hold anybody accountable until we get on the same page in terms of like we may not see the neighborhood the same, but we believe in our neighborhood and we want better for our neighborhood. That is a common thing that we have to do. And so we become safeguards of our neighborhood in saying like this is how we create racial equity through racial healing, healing ourselves from the trauma, because the things that they've done has created trauma on top of trauma. And until we're able to heal ourselves, then we can begin to organize ourselves as a body to talk about and challenge the system.
All right, and then another one of the challenges that naturally presents itself is one of the arguments I always insist on presenting to people. It's the cultural differences. The cultural differences of living in a community like this and the understanding of what an urban plan looks like, how urban plans are developed, and then furthermore, how an urban plan is accepted. Oftentimes when we're thinking of this ideology is groomed and presented in a perspective that is disconnecting from racial equity immediately. The whole premise of most of these systems, when we think of the development, city planning itself, it's designed in inequality. It's designed from the premise of systemic racism. Some would say, I would call it white supremacy, but the lens of even how we look at what would be beneficial and valuable to a community is not seen from a lens where the residents are drafting what's being created. It's academics, it's corporations, it's people that may be a part of communities, but are not looking from the heart of a community when they're deciding what should be a part of a community. So even the idea of the existence of one of the big discussions is like the bike lane discussion. And people are like, bike lanes can add to the quality of life because people should be riding bikes and it should be safe. But in a city like Detroit, there's so many people that take the bus. And our bus stops have been in poor conditions for generations. So when a bike lane is given the money and green lit and found public-private partnerships where millions of dollars can create these bike lanes and recondition how city roadways are running and even how traffic can flow. But people that take the bus and need to take the bus in a city that has had challenges of connected inequality for a busing system for generations, and then you'll deal with a snowstorm and it's barely one or two bus booths for miles. This is where residents feel left out and not included in it. So when you speak to residents holding these organizations accountable, what ways can residents even speak that same language? And should the onus even be on the resident to learn these systems and learn the ways that the developers and the urban planners are executing their plan? How do you make the planners and the developers actually ingratiate themselves with the culture of the community that they plan to enter instead of just executing what they want to do?
I think fundamentally, we as community folks have to be willing to rock the boat. And what I mean by rock the boat is develop a vision and plan that represent the true interests of our community and control the interests of our community by developing outcomes that's for our community, that's by our community. Too many of us are compromising our values, compromising our process to meet a demand that continues to oppress and exploit us. So, and what I mean by that is the previous guy that was over, the planner, I can't think his name, that came from New Orleans. He had came across my name somehow, and he sent me an email like, I want to meet with you. I'm like, sure, we can meet. And I brought him here, and actually it was lot worse condition in terms of in the early stage. Just give them, hey, this is what we're doing. This is our vision. Either you can support this or, I'll catch up with you in. And it was a summer day, walked in through the neighborhood, give me a real visual. And walking down to the gas station, and the little homies was in there, and that's the hangout spot. And they was shooting dice, and I broke up their dice game to have him talk. The homies talk to him, like, tell him what's going on. In your way that's comfortable to you. He almost shitted on himself because he fun one. We broke up the dice game, and he like, what the hell? And so being able to, like, I don't support that. However, I know that's who they are,
and that's a part of the culture of the community right now.
Yeah, and so I was saying that culture is like, listen to you talk, and just me traveling abroad. These conditions that we talking about are third world conditions, third world conditions in America, but we don't see it that way. And it's the same way when big corporations, globally look like, I'm gonna go to Ghana, I'm gonna go to South Africa, I'm gonna go to Palestine, and we're gonna invest and we're gonna do such and such. It's the same process, and because at the end of the day, it's about a profit. So and we as individuals who have not had, we desire that ability to have that same profit, but we don't realize that profit is at the expense of ourselves, at the expense of selling off our neighborhoods, of selling off our own souls. I mean, when you look at these communities, these households, they was in our family history, right? That's one of the reasons. Like, I love this block. That's why I love this community, because this is my grandfather. I mean, to walk away from this is to like kind of turn my back on my grandfather a little bit, and that's how much it means to me in the grand scheme of things. But growing up urban, we don't necessarily associate it in the same way. Like if we live down south and we've gotten away from, and so the more we get back to those roots, the ability where we can begin to create the safeguard of holding ourselves accountable, to holding others accountable. So the onus is on us in the sense of, this is where we live. We can have a quality community. We had that. I mean, you go back 60, 70 years ago. This was booming. Why was booming? Because we all we had was each other. But once we began to grow outside of our communities, we relinquish our ability to control the interests of our community.
Okay, and you spoke on a time when you talk about 60, 70, 80 years ago, when segregation forced a calcification of all, I guess, caste systems of the black community that existed. There was a more close-knit black community where a doctor would, though being black, was forced to live next to the guy that didn't have a job.
Right.
So when we speak of the resources existent in a segregated black community having some economic advantages comparable to a community that's no longer segregated, in necessarily, like, I guess I would say it's not segregated from the lens of the physical sense, but the economic sense. In a lot of ways, many of those resources don't even exist for the same business people and for people to decide, as you talked on, the outcomes for communities, outcomes by communities, making these plans of what's desired and dreamed of. And not necessarily just welcoming community development because it looks like a good idea, but also necessarily making sure that community development fits into what a plan of a community is, as opposed to designing something that is orchestrated from a premise in a classroom or in a corporation or in the minds of someone that has never walked the blocks of that neighborhood itself.
Right.
Next question goes into something big in community development. When most people think of community development, a lot of the roots go back to the block grant programs. Community block grants. A lot of people always say that. Most times when people walk into the Detroit is Different incubator, the very first thing they say is, who gives you money for this? And I always tell them, I pay for this. And they're like,
Right.
what do you mean? It's like, my business pays for the Detroit is Different incubator, meaning that I am an entrepreneur and I fund my venture project that is a community project because it's important for me. I don't have any granting. I don't have any scholarships. I don't have any
Sponsorships.
outside interest. Anyone that has invested in it is someone that has invested because of a personal relationship directly. Now, am I against granting? Am I against scholarships? Am I against any of that support? Not necessarily, but that's just not a lane that I found successful to pursue for Detroit is different. But one of the number one things that I've always been told is it's as easy as pie. Just get a community block grant. Community block grants are programming that started from HUD. And this kind of goes back into the whole concept of urban and urban planning. And I think urban, for a long time as it's existed, kind of going to the comedy of George Carlin, urban is like an AKA word for black or brown, but primarily black. So the whole idea of we're going to help urban communities is like a indirect way where people think you're saying black and it'll be understood as you're going to help black people. But in reality, HUD and urban planning and urban development has been so disassociated from actually improving black communities that it is one of the trigger words that I think actually people in communities get afraid of nowadays. And when we think about the community block grants and the process of even what decides how community block grants are doled out, how an organization qualifies for these, it can become, it's a process. It's a process where many organizations and communities are already going to have to welcome outside help, outside assistance to receive this grant. And furthermore, executing that grant, you're going to probably have to get other outside assistance. So here's a classic example of what can happen. Let's say you have community organization A. Community organization A is like, wow, we're doing something great in the community. And it's like, you can get some granting options. And it's like, wow, that's dope. Please give me some granting options. Community organization A wins $25,000. And it's like, for real? I got $25,000? How do I execute this $25,000? Well, you have to go through our fiduciary. The fiduciary is like, okay, we'll give you this funding and you can spend this funding based upon these limited vendors, based upon the vision of your business plan, based upon you fitting the premise of how we design everything. So the qualifications move that organization, community group A, further and further and further away of whatever that intention could be, whether it be to build a community playground, whether it be to start a recreational center, a computer program, an inventors lab, an arts program. It could be whatever. It's like, I just really want to do art. I never wanted to get into the design of urban planning and bringing lawyers and architects and designers into my mix. I know they play a role, but they don't play as important of a role as actually executing the work itself. And that has been one of the biggest challenges when it comes to some of these block grants and government assistance and government programming that people talk to. It's not just that the qualifications take the community away, but as the community organizations connect themselves to the qualifications, it takes the community away from the work. So the same way I asked you the question for the philanthropists and foundations, now I flip and ask the question of what role should the government in HUD play being included in community development that's residential and racially equitable? How can residents hold government organizations accountable for racial equity? So when I think of this, I'm going to jump on this question first, and then I'm going to have Yusef be a part of this question next, as we handling community work right now. So helping the community. Yusef's always like, if you come to the Urban Network, and that's the break that people saw is Josh came, but most of the work done here at the Urban Network is done by people that live in the neighborhood. Some people that have lived here for generations and just know Yusef. So most of this work, even the creativity of, if you see the doors as a ceiling, it's like a ceiling of doors. That's community creativity that connects to the community. Yeah. But what role should the government and HUD play being included in community development that's residentially and racially equitable?
I think it's the same as we addressed around philanthropy and foundation. I mean, any true change starts from the bottom. It doesn't start from the top. Again, if we assess the people who are living there, they have bright ideas. They're brilliant, but because of their circumstances, we place this privileged value on folks who have more access to resource, more access to so-called knowledge. And it's really a very sophisticated game. Because basically what you're talking about, I remember 20, 30 years ago, the empowerment zone, like that was real hip. That was created to where it determined what neighborhoods was getting access to resources.
Next.
Which also is tied into foundations and philanthropy. But I mean, you would think based upon the physical look of Zone 8, it will be at the top of the list of an empowerment zone. It never hit the notice of being an empowerment zone within the 40 years. So not being an empowerment zone, we never really had nonprofits. So the anchor of this community and anchors of other communities began to crumble. So as they began to crumble and not having access to government assistance, but besides, creating plans that was pushing people out, it created what we see. I mean, this is where, like, when we talk about capitalism, and that's what I'm saying, community development is a capitalist business. And it puts a value on property versus a value on people. And when we put a value on people and associate that to property, it's a win-win situation. Because fundamentally, what's the point of having property if you have no people, or the people who live there can't even afford to live there? So, and then race and class, and particularly in a country such as America, has been so intertwined in how we live. Or let me correct myself, how many of us have survived. So if I don't have a stable job, if I don't have a stable credibility of knowing someone, I'm on the ass out looking in on the situation. So again, and we know in terms of HUD and corporate government, a lot of, we see now backdoor deals, but backdoor deals been going on for long periods of time. And many of these neighborhoods, it's like a 50-year, 60-year plan. And we as a community are just now catching up to, like, what the hell? Like, you been telling me you've been planning this for 50 years? And the unfortunate reality is, like Henry Ford, we've been banging on their door, like, hey, let us in. We want to know what's going on. Show us the blueprints. And they'll show us a period. They'll show us, where they dotted the T, but they're not revealing everything. But then your representative of the politician, they're picking and choosing who are coming to the table. And so it's such a rat race. And the rat race is about, because we live in a country where power and privilege are tied together, and we all want to be recognized in some type of way, but at what expense is my question. Why are we not representing our community? Why are we not representing, it's such a cliche now, like, I'm fighting for the people, I represent the people. Well, you never with the people.
And that brings to the question that I definitely want to open up to the floor, because government officials, I look at it, it's a little bit different. Should it fall in a different boat because they're elected through the people? And a philanthropist or a foundation can hide behind the veil of, this is my own independent passion. This is what I choose to greenlight. This is what I support. As a philanthropist, I support all people that, live on this side of town, people maybe with this ailment, or people with this passion. And a government agency has a different onus in reference to how they connect to people.
And let me just cut you off real quick. 2 miles, about two and a half miles from here, you have Durfield Elementary School, which was given to a white nonprofit for $1.
Durfee.
Yeah, Durfee. It was given to a
connected to Central.
Yes, to an outsider community, for $1. And there's been many cases, many situations in the city of Detroit, where big businesses they're getting at first access, a first appeal to property. Again, people who've been living there, who has sweat equity. I can tell you, my homeboy got shot there, or when I was a little kid, I was drunk. I mean, we have these memories, right, that shape us, and which brings a different form of equity, and we don't get the same access. Because I believe over there on 7 Mile, UOD Jesuit was given a property where people in the community was fighting for the same property. But again, when we talk about race and class, this is how it plays out, and then you're like, oh, there you go talking that race stuff. That's what it is. Like my value as a member of this community is not the same as someone else in terms of because of their whiteness, because of their privileged status.
I definitely want to open this up. I don't know who wants to speak on this. I'm looking right at Jay, but that role of philanthropists, foundation versus government when it comes to community development, I think someone else should add in this discussion. So I don't know who's going to be the first person to grab that mic that's sitting right there. Like I say, I'm leaning on Jay. Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Jay's Fades. You can take the mic with you because it can pass it. You can pick it up, take it with you. Entrepreneur, a lot of community work, definitely. So I just want to make sure I get the framework. So the question originally was, the question originally was, in what ways should philanthropists and foundations partner in community development to build neighborhoods that are residentially and racially equitable? So it's like, should the philanthropist and the foundation be held to a different standard versus the government agency that's looking at community development?
Okay, so to me, that conversation is really interesting, but my very straight answer would be vested interest, right? With the people, for the people, should be the process, and that's so general that I don't know if it really satisfies the answer. I know it's many conversations that take place when we start to talk about projects. And I do understand oftentimes on an emotional level, people have a desire for things to get done. And oftentimes it does not align with some of the paperwork processes, or it also doesn't align with how people are wanting it to go, right? Answer it outside of, the community working well with those groups.
So when you say the community working with those groups, this is where, like, I guess I could look at the politician. I have a say in a foundation. How much do I have a say in that foundation? The philanthropist, how much do I have a say in that foundation? And you said you started this with kind of where Yusef was going, that it needs to be led by working with the community itself. Whereas I guess I'm still under the veil, and this may be very optimistic, that can the elected official be considered part of the community themselves because they were elected, quote unquote, by the community? Right. So with any initiative by that elected.
So that's very interesting, because when you look at the political realm, most people are aware that it's vested interest from parties that the community might not be aware of, right? So in that space, there is a disconnect because they are, I guess, pulling interest from areas that the community might not be aware of. So when you ask those type of questions that's really complex, I don't believe you'll get the type of answer that you're wanting, right? So for example, it would almost be if we are working together and we're looking at it from a percentage standpoint, you know, what percent of growth can you bring to the table versus Yusef, you know what I'm saying, versus myself. And I'm not sure that we can qualify or quantify those things because we haven't started the work. So how are you creating a question that has no accountability factor in it, but yet you still want to see how to hold one accountable in that question?
And I think I agree with everything that you're saying, in particular when you say it's padded, right? And so to remove some of the layers to understand it, when we look at or how we've been conditioned to look at philanthropy, foundations, and politicians, they're rooted in privilege. They're rooted in power, and because of their privilege and power, we're conditioned to automatically think that they can save us, that they can solve this problem because of their access. So it's like coming down, and we're going to bring everything together. So that's where it's like in the real world, like we need everybody, right? We need each other. That's where it's complex. For the most part, again, I mean, in this conversation could go from community to youth to on down the road because it all intersects.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, and as I'm going through some of the technical, like getting it tight, it's like, man, I definitely want to throw one more question your way in reference to this whole idea of how that accountability looks, because that's the second part of this question. It's how can residents hold government organizations accountable for residential and racial equity when it comes to community development? In what ways can residents do that?
So that's interesting because it's almost like a parent trying to hold a child accountable for being successful. Mm-hmm. So in that relationship, keyword there, relationship, right? It's going to be some information handed down, and there's going to be some support along the way, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, I think the base of that question is almost like hope, right? So I hope that something can happen, right? So for me, I don't necessarily live my life in that space about hoping and maybe and kind of sort of and what do you think, those types of I guess areas of understanding. For me, it's more about getting active and taking action opposed to asking for support, if that makes sense, right? So when you speak to how can we hold people accountable, if me and you in a room and I'm asking you to pick up some trash and you say, Jay, I don't pick up trash, and then we get into this long dialogue about, well, why don't you pick up the trash? Wouldn't my energy be more effective by just picking the trash up? You know what I mean?
And he went into something that definitely kind of goes into a lot of some of the work that I've done and Yusef has done, and that's taking on the onus of community development and the vision of it intrinsically, and not even necessarily looking at some of what have been presented as resources for this work,
right,
and saying intrinsically, if it's outside of the scope of the people I've connected with, the organizations I've connected with, or the work I've already done, if this is outside of the work and the volition of the work I've done, then I'm not even going to put the energy in it. And that, I guess, and I don't know if even somebody else wants to speak to this, but you may be able to speak more to this too. With that type of thought process becomes, if an organization and a team of people feel as though we can go for this block grant, we can talk to these philanthropists, we can work and we can do our work in a different way by a different means, and it can be more effective because you may be working with a group of people. It can take you outside that scope. So that group of people may send you in a direction that seeks you asking that person to pick up that piece of paper, if that is the mission. So I know you have a point.
So I was listening to everything that was said, and I think it's definitely a layered discussion, and also grappling with our current social and political climate in the city. We have administration that thinks we have an administration that thinks their plan is the best, and in terms of the things that they want to implement, like bike lanes and streetscapes and things like that, and that's not necessarily reflective of what our community actually needs. And so these developers, they bring in the different teams or whatever, and they have these meetings, a series of meetings that I've gone to, particularly in my neighborhood, but the actual community input that was given isn't really in the plan when it comes down to it. So then it comes, what was the purpose of having these series of meetings if you were just gonna go about the plan that you wanted to do in the first place, making it a walkable neighborhood? And also thinking about all these different banks and corporations starting these neighborhood strategic funds and these different quote unquote empowerment zones or hot neighborhoods. And what's their true intention? Some of them, they say, well, I have a connection to this community that goes back, or my family, whatever. And this white savior kind of complex usually comes from.
And I want you to speak a little bit more and share your opinion on this. But to that, along with block grants, you have community development financial institution funds. So CDFIs. One of the strongest here is the Detroit Development Fund, and also First Independence. And these play as a generating economic growth model connected to some of the same ideas and ideology behind block grants, but more so to strategically offer loan and business assistance to jumpstart economic initiatives in these different communities. And that is very abundant throughout the city of Detroit, kind of in conjunction with not just banks, but institutions serving in a banking capacity, exactly like what you said. So some of the interest is the interest that they've had. If you can go on the website for CDFI, you'll see the millions of dollars that has not just come in Detroit, but throughout Michigan connected to this programming. And then also find a little bit of the information around the guise of how they decide to dictate how this money is lent. I can speak to a little bit of how the Detroit Development Fund looks at issuing, granting dollars in support of business, because I've seen some of their applications. And to me, if you can receive a loan from the DDF, you could probably get a loan from Bank of America. The premise at which they have it, knowing that they're taking the funds from a different pool of money that is associated with the government, I think it's not directly impacting and changing the scope of communities like mine. First Independence has access to a lot of these funds as well, and it's like what Yusef said. Community development is a business. It's a tool of capitalism. What's your opinion when it comes to the ways that maybe these organizations can look at being open to being community led?
Well, I'm seeing a good example in my neighborhood. I live in Old Redford, and it's a kind of a mix because you have Peter Cummins in the platform that's developing part of Grand River, that's investing $3.5 million in that corridor between Grand River and Losser. But the work, as far as the construction and things like that, is being led by a community group, Motor City Blackbusters. So that's unique in that case, and a lot of the a lot of the people that work with them live within that community. To have them do that contracting, starting out work, I think is good. As far and then also Flagstar Bank has committed $5 million, $1 million each year for the next 5 years to the community. Is with that grant, and right now I'm actually in the process of starting a Northwest Detroit Community Development Corporation for Old Redford. We're gonna work with a number of the surrounding neighborhoods to kind of attract more and more of those dollars around those community-led projects that I know that's going on. So that's a process. But I'm hopeful. Beyond just being hopeful, I think you just have to make sure that you are getting your voice out there. Like they're revisiting the community benefits ordinance, because a lot of those projects are coming into the neighborhoods, and so the threshold, so they have to revisit the whole community benefits ordinance. And if we don't show up to the city council meetings and don't put our input out, then it won't be reflective of what the community wants to see in terms of when corporations and things like that come to our neighborhood for new development.
And you spoke to something I was just about to get to with the community benefits ordinances that do exist. It's an article in Today, January 21st, 2020, Curb Detroit, talking directly about that, and more so the lack of accountability and also the lack of enforcement that the community benefits ordinances can play out. Also, the appointment of these people to these boards being inclusive of city council or government influence as well, which could be questionable. But this goes into the idea of that accountability. How do you hold some of this work accountable? And then this is the question I posed back to Yusef. When if a plan and a vision were developed for a community by the people in the community, how is that drafted? Who are the people that are in the making of that? Is that changed around? Is it an organization? Is it a church? Is it a person? Is it a neighborhood association? What are the ways that the community can have a plan, and instead of trying to fit a plan into an idea to get some money to pursue, resources, whether it be money or jobs or whatever other resource, solar power, greening energy, fit into the plan of the community as opposed to the opposite?
I think it's all of those individuals. But what has to happen in the beginning is our commitment to our community, first and foremost. Our commitment to our neighborhood, first and foremost. We may not agree ideology-wise, but within that framework, so again, so some folks want gardens, all right? So you're the gardener. Some folks want a doghouse. You're the dog. But it's all fitting within the neighborhood, within the context of committing to our community. Because if we don't, we'll get picked off. Because what happens is the big corporations will come in and buy J off, and come in and they'll buy me off. And not literally, but in the sense of they'll get behind his idea to support their interests. I mean, case in point, we talk about the community benefit agreement. Detroit People's Platform, they had one that was really representing the people, and then the mayor and some other folks, their community benefit agreement got approved, which didn't represent the people. So fundamentally, we have to get back and do the legwork of doing grassroots organizing. Grassroots does not mean what it used to mean. It's something else nowadays. And so what happened at this level, we're being picked off. We're more excited about seeing our names in the paper. We're more excited about seeing our faces on TV than really representing the interests of the people, where we're trying to be heroes and then versus being a real activist, being a real organizer, always saying those issues and putting the issues of the people before our own. Again, I mean, the question, we had to question everything, question the integrity. I mean, you Harrison mentioned the Motor City Blightbuster, right? I forget the guy's name who runs that, right? He has a great relationship in this city, and because of his white privilege, he gets access to a lot of dollars. Millions of dollars. In that particular community, him and his organization owns a lot of property in their community. Like in my community, there's a black family, there's a block and a half. They own a nice chunk of this in this community, but they're saying they're community. How can you be community as individual? But you're saying that you're community. And these are things that we have to begin to disconnect, to be able to connect to the people in the true interests of the people. Because at the end of the day, when we think about capitalism, we think about white supremacy, these are values. And this value system has infiltrated us, and it functions like a sleeping cell. What I mean by sleeping cell, again, many of us have been without. And so when the opportunity to have, and you just, the itch, when you see some money, you're like, damn, I didn't know I would do that. Because it's just so rooted in you. We all get tempted. And that's where the theory, I've had so many, like, you said, try to pull me from the path. What you want? I don't want nothing, man. Don't do for my community. Don't do for me. Again, this is, even to our vision, like, so many people have told us with this vision and what we have here, like, that's stupid. Why would you do that? Because at the end of the day, this is my community. This ain't for me. We don't have a community center. So why not turn the house? We have to think, reimagine what the world could be. But to reimagine what the world could be, we have to reimagine who we are. And fundamentally, that's what King said, radically changing our value system, radically changing how we see the world. And once we do that, then, because like over on the east side, that business that bought up a lot of property and said they're gonna plant trees. The community was like, no, we don't want to do that. But because of their interest, and we see time and time again with city councils, they're voting in the interest of business. They're voting in the interest of corporation when the people who elected them saying no. And then those individuals who are like don't want to necessarily be called out, they missed the day, which is really like a vote, like a yes anyway, because you didn't vote no.
I'll say one more last thing. You're right about that. I'm thinking back to you said earlier about elected officials being a part of the community development, and I recently think about my state rep Sherry Dagan Yogo. She had purchased 2 homes to give to community members, and we had been working on it over the course of the years, and had people in the different unions helping restore these houses to give away. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, without notice, the demolition tore down the house from the city. And from her track record, it was probably because she stood up against the mayor on a number of things. And I just was like, that's wild. And he's like actually said too, like, since you don't want to vote with me against, like, with the car insurance, which that's interconnected with this too, but all of that, but he was like, I'm going to have people run against you because you're not representing my interests. And she's representing the interests of the people because she know it wasn't a good thing, and I was just like, that is, you know, crazy that that's a real life example of like, if you don't vote or rub shoulders with the right person or do what they want to do, they can abuse their power like that.
Definitely, this current mayoral office administration. It's many people that have that call to question the ethics when it comes to the way that many property policies are enacted, and that can be to what's happening with the taxation of people's properties, what's happening with the tax abatements, meaning the taxes that many quote unquote corporate investors, developers actually are paying into the city, and also the programming of how development is designed in the city of Detroit, in this quote unquote new Detroit. There are many benefits. You spoke to Durfee, but not just Durfee. I mean, when we look at some of the holdings and the offerings of wonderful architecture and a beautiful stock of property that was handed out to many corporations, and the tax abatements and the taxes that don't need to be paid for generations. You know, it's in some ways disheartening as an entrepreneur, those opportunities. But this is the system we're breaking down. That system that we're breaking down of systemic racism, white supremacy. Like it is intrinsically what was always there. Some of the design even of the ways that community, the roads and the traffic systems are designed. Like this is constant. One of the big things that many people have talked about is the redevelopment of Livernois and what's happened on Livernois. One of the big questions was, why was a median put in the middle of Livernois in the first place for many residents? And then after why the median was put in the middle of Livernois, and we got a Livernois business person actually about to speak on Jay. I know.
Yeah.
Now comes.
Yeah. So guys, you say y'all want me to talk about some of this stuff, right?
Okay. All right, Jay.
If you pay attention to the dialogue, it's kind of going right back to me a little bit. Okay. So I own a business on Livernois. So
How long you been on that business over there?
Since 2005. jaysfades.com here in the Salon. Yeah. So please don't knock my building down, Mr. Mayor. If that is true, right? Okay. So to my understanding, when I got there, we were holding meetings, and I believe Kwame Kilpatrick had money left to develop boulevards. So he was using the money to develop more of a walking environment similar to your Ferndale and your Royal Oak, right? And it was a process that's phased out, right? So when I say phase, meaning that's phases, right? Okay. So they changed the speed limit to help increase what is considered a walking environment, because a lot of people were actually just quickly driving past the businesses and not able to see what was available for that community, right? So they are now widening the street and creating what now seems to be a little more walking friendly type of environment.
And they've expanded the sidewalks
Right.
immensely.
Right.
So it's still like it's still essentially the 2-lane Livernois.
Right.
But just instead of the median being in the middle of the street, it's almost like they split the median to the sides of the street.
Right. So you can be in the conversation in the space of just seeing what's taking place and be opinionated from that standpoint. you can be in a conversation where you understand some of the process, and the community is in many parts of that conversation. The conversation that I'm in is let's get actively involved in participating in the things that we want to create. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times people like to have stuff to chew on, so to speak. And, for me, it's really about, it's business over there. So while we talking about the street, which we put energy into talking about the street, why aren't we having a conversation about the businesses that's on the street? You know what I'm saying? And it's a choice.
So how did you feel as many of the businesses, I guess, were north, near 7 Mile, this summer through the construction, rallied together, actually took some funding from the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation to do some ad campaigns. Some of the businesses shortened their days. Some of the businesses are saying they may even go out of business to the business that they lost during that time, all connected to that idea of, like you say, like, how do you shift the focus from what happened to the business itself?
Okay, so the question was, how do I feel about that?
Yes.
Right? So I got to watch you because you're so good, champ. We have 4 of them. So, so I feel great, right? And I'll use an analogy. I had opportunity to speak with Dick Gregory, and the conversation that me and him had was, I said, Mr. Gregory, how do you feel about, our city? He said, young man, it was a time where if you told people that was riding horses that they're not going to be riding horses no more, they're going to be in cars, they look at you like you crazy. So that kind of stuck with me, right? Because it's all about perspective. Some people are used to their past and what they've experienced and not necessarily interested in embracing or creating an opportunity to do something differently. Now, going back to Livernois specifically, and my thought about the businesses and hearing what they were talking about, when you start to have a desire to speak to policy, I've noticed the ignorance as it pertains to the ask. Right? So sometimes the community believe that they can ask certain questions to people who is perceived of power based upon their title, but they aren't aware of how much power that individual or title has. You got that? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes people are spending energy in areas historically it has not helped them, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I don't know what all is taking place, but I know Roy McAllister's over there doing some great work. I did have opportunity to sit in on one of the meetings, and I don't know if the viewers know, but we actually had young people to write into the Charter Commission by way of Reggie Reg Davis, which created policy where young people could be present, as well as an elderly person by district that will work along with the city council members, right? I believe if we activated those policies, that we can create a different dialogue and a different approach when it comes to activating our communities, just that way. So that's quickly my little 2 cents about that. I hope that answered the question.
Definitely. And this kind of circles back to empowerment and self-reliance of the people in the community. You spoke on this a lot today. You offered a lot in this vision. We have some other people in the crowd that own spaces. You one of them, Josh. I want to open the floor in reference to some of these same questions, but really the last thing is resident led versus resident inclusion. Is it a difference? So I'm gonna put that to you first, and how do both work in unison? Can they work in unison? Should it be inclusion sometimes? Should it be led? What's that vision when it comes to community development, Yusef?
Absolutely. There's a difference between resident-led and resident inclusion. I think like substituting the word community for the word neighborhood. And when I'm going with the neighborhood is like this: we're in a neighborhood, and we talk about neighborhood, but we're saying community, and community is a larger space. Like when you cross the boulevard, it's a separate neighborhood. It's another community, and we assume that all communities are the same, and all people are the same, and they're not. So once we can be able to pull that up, then that helps us address the dynamics that exist, and it allows us to pull ourselves together. And I think fundamentally, in the country that we live in, there's a lot of disparity around race, around gender, around class, and et cetera. And we start from there. This is how we get to equity. This is how we get to healing. This is how we transform and deconstruct the realities, the social realities. Like the politicians that say private, yeah, I agree with you, it's racism. I agree with you, blah, blah, blah. But publicly, they're on a whole other page. They function and think the same thing with philanthropies and foundations. So getting people to agree to a certain levels of values, again, all of us in this room probably played Monopoly multiple times in our life. Some of us may have a few nightmares from it, right? But I have a nightmare because in reality, I see Monopoly here in Detroit. The fact that you have two corporations that own all of downtown, basically, the Illages and Dan Gilbert. This is like Boardwalk and Park Place in real life. When you get down there, like, can I afford this? Is this really for me? And this is where it's excluding a large segment of people. I remember living on the northwest side of town, and I could catch the bus or ride my bike to the Northwest Movie Theater, or go to Mercury Movie Theater. Or when I lived over here, I would go down to Adams Theater. There's no movie theater. There's nothing for young folks, for old folks. So we're trapped in our oppression. We're trapped in this daily life, a cycle of, we got to go to the gas station to buy quality shit, which is not quality at all. We can't, even though there's a Myers on 8 Mile or there's a Myers on 6 Mile, but there's no inclusion for a certain amount of people to really get there to experience the quality of the things that they have that's better than the Save-A-Lot, that's better than these other little stores that we are forced to go to from social engineering. And so, even like we talk about on Livernois, like I love what's going over there, but in reality, can the folks in this community get there? So how do we create parity for our community where it doesn't feel like that's a privilege? And in reality, everybody doesn't have that privilege to experience everything equally because we don't have the same income. So that's where values come into place, and fundamentally, this is how we transform how we operate, how we think, by supporting people in our community and looking at them as equity of themselves because of their history and their generations of being in the community.
And in that goes a partnership in my own community. The Detroit is Different Festival took place at the Andy Space, which is definitely one of the people behind the vision of that. It's Josh. We met through the connection of Stephanie, who's another neighbor in our neighborhood, but community, as I'm always using the term in this discussion. What is it like for you when you think about resident-led versus resident inclusion, and then also the partnership that we shared and we're growing, connecting the Andy and Detroit is Different, that is independent of philanthropists, government, or a foundation?
Yeah. Well, a little bit of background. I'm kind of like a typical story of a guy from New York, came here, got a big building in Detroit, and thinking of doing, opening an art center. So this is the narrative that a lot of people will hear and speak back to me. That's sort of my biography. I think it's a little more complex, but in the end, we'll see what proof is in the pudding in 10 years, what happens to the space. That's a good segue into what is resident-led. We've been asking that question. I would say that it takes work, like this gentleman is doing, to create a resident-led platform. Like it takes people going door to door, getting people to meetings, talking about what kind of art program in our situation, or we have all this empty retail space on Fenkell that we would love to collaborate with an entrepreneur to open, to try to revive some commercial on Fenkell. But that's really work. It's like getting out and doing and calling meetings, like we're here tonight. And most days I spend like on my roof patching roofs, and so I sometimes feel like I can't manage that process of like of community development, of like moving forward, like asking that question of like, how can this building lead towards development in the Fenkell-Dexter area and racial healing? Like, how can that happen? Like, I'm deeply invested in that question in our process of development, but I definitely need help and collaborators. And Khary, you've, I'm glad we've begun this partnership, and we're in it for the long term, so we're trying to go slow and just gradually open that building so it feels welcoming to the community or to the neighborhood. But I also wanted to say that the neighborhood is also not like, it's among themselves, they're not necessarily in agreement about what they want or how they see their neighborhood. So that complicates like that a lot too for me. Like, first, like everybody, for example, in my street's like 100% behind Dugan. So like I hear a lot of different messages about what development would look like, or like, so, but in the end, I feel like me and my partner, Laura, we just gonna keep listening and just trying to keep making that space welcoming, safe, and affordable. That's sort of our short-term goal.
And that's the other question that I have. Do you have a different, I think that one of the differences is because you live in the community and live in that neighborhood, it changes the perspective of how you see it. And that's one of the biggest things that I stand on. A lot of people that look to do some of this work don't live in the neighborhoods that they're planning to do the work in. And I believe that definitely changes the perspective, as we have another comment now in it. So I don't know if you want to add to that or if we can pass the mic, but I definitely think that changes a lot of the perspective of how a person sees it.
Yeah, it's essential because you literally get to know your neighbors. Unless you know your neighbors, you can't be part of the community. You're not part of a neighborhood unless you know your neighbors. Mm-hmm. There is no neighborhood unless people know each other. So, but there's a lot of fear in our neighborhood, about just meeting each other. And what was news to me is that Focus Hope, they host something called the Takeover. And a takeover is simply to occupy a corner on Fenkell and eat hamburgers and give kids balloons. For me, coming there, I didn't understand this, but then I come to understand that all those neighbors, they don't feel safe standing on the corner. So meaning like there's lots of building to do in that neighborhood to sort of make people feel like they want to be there and they want to sort of positively express their desires for the future. You know, so some thoughts.
Okay. I contemplating not saying anything because I don't want to start speaking in the mystical language because I do believe a lot in that. But what I want to say is I have so many things going on in my mind and I was trying to remember everything so I can address everything. But as far as, these are my ideas, as far as being the recipient of grants and sponsorships and those things like that, from what I've experienced, from what I've seen, it's like you need to have someone of privilege on your team. And then it almost has to be an illusion that they're running things. And then you can have the doors open easier as far as receiving the capital that you may need for this project or that project. Other than that, if you're trying to do this thing as a community, as a neighborhood, I think what matters most is unity in numbers. So, and it's pretty hard to get that lately because I think the one thing that we may share in this room is our perspective about life and how we see life for ourselves, right? And for ourselves meaning where we live, the places that we go, how we would like them to look, how we would like to experience them. Does everyone in your neighborhood have that same desire or even vision? How do they see themselves first and foremost? And that would be the determining factor as to if they will be a part of an organization that will show up to community meetings or go to this place or that place in order to be heard, in order to ask for what it is that you need to get your project off the ground or even finished. So I think this issue is greater than we had anticipated when it comes to getting us to come together for a common cause and not easily bought off, as one of you has said, for individual cause. Once we get to to the position of being in front of a person with influence or with capital or power, we can easily leave the group. So, and something you said, Jay, about you really don't go towards or lean towards the side of hope, having hope in a lot of things, but you're more action oriented. And I think the two go together because you can't have hope without action, right? So, you think you can?
Yeah, I don't think you hope to get up and walk in the morning. I think you do it.
Well, I think that when you think you can't, you can hope first and then try second.
Right. So that's a process before a process.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I agree. I agree. But I think it's a principle that faith, which is hope, without works is dead. Yes, but I think they go together. I know. I just wanted to say. So I think I'm finished because I lost my train of thought.
No, we appreciated what you said. I don't know. Please speak.
Yeah, so I'm actually revisiting. I just came from overseas, and now I'm back here in the States now.
Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. So kind of what I want to touch in and what you guys were speaking about, I mean, I kind of been through that whole brink, like literally as far as to how we confuse neighborhood with community, how we have different opinions about stuff, you know, everything balanced, the faith and hope aspect. One simple thing that I've been able to kind of correlate is that it starts simple. We can't judge what we don't create. First off, just point blank period. So it's like, you know, I kind of been in the mindset where I don't even tell people they're wrong anymore, because we have to get to the fact that everything that people say dealing with people, they got that from somewhere. So who are we to say where they got that from is wrong when we didn't ever create it? So that's kind of one of the main things that when it comes to the people building and, you know, executing and coming together, that's the first thing we have to take into consideration. I can't tell my neighbor no. I can't tell them that they're wrong. But if we can have an understanding here that something happened to us, mm-hmm. and this is not truly and purely your choice, because we was talking about this earlier today, a kid can't help who he's born to or who she's born to. She can't help or he can't help who the parents are. So, you know, just given our trials and tribulations and stuff like that, we have to take on that responsibility of just starting off and saying, you know what, you're not wrong. Let's take what I know and what you know and put that together. So if we start there, that'll actually be, you know, our climax and our turning point, because again, we're dealing in a system, monopoly, where after you roll a dice, it's out of your hands.
And that kind of brings us back 360 to the idea of intrinsic works. And under those intrinsic works kind of goes back to what Yusef was saying, and he opened up the discussion around value systems and a vision that the community has itself, and bringing the neighbors and the different people that want to participate in that vision to an understanding of what has been created. So I definitely, right and wrong becomes more relative as I grow older, but I am one to say that this is the premise. I can provide a premise and an understanding of this was the basis of the plan as of now. And this is the plan enacted and the vision we have. Please include what this is for you. Some of this can be very difficult. You spoke to our neighborhood, and our neighborhood is different people with different visions. It's transient for some, because there are some renters, there are some homeowners, there are seniors, there are young people, different visions. Different people feel trapped in my neighborhood. Certain people want to be there. That already is a difference. I love my neighborhood. I plan to be there for forever. So that already changes the perspective for some that feel like as soon as I can, I'm getting the hell out of here. Right. So their perspective is already different. Now with it, as certain developments happen, and development in my neighborhood is usually a dollar store coming to my neighborhood. But I mean, I'm being 100% honest.
Oh, I understand.
So that dollar store then becomes one of the resources in my community. But this is the some of this is being enacted when we look at this business and capitalism of community development, because the incentive for the buy-in for other things in my community is not being driven, and the tools of neighbors such as myself and residents are not given that. Now, to graft and create something that other people can buy into. And I'm also one to think that the patience in the process of it. So the seed that's being created right now through Detroit is Different, through Jay's Fades, through the Urban Network, is going to create more seeds as time goes on to even see that intrinsically this is possible. Because with what I'm doing with Detroit is Different, I'm sure something like that in a premise exists. The closest thing I have is what RJ Watkins does with Watkins Broadcasting, HPR, TV 33. But other than that, you know, I think of the early GPR stories, but it's very few and far between of Black independent media existing in a city with this many Black folks.
And you hit right on the same spot. That was going to be my next thing. How many people are willing to do something that they're not going to be able to receive glory and see and experience it themselves?
but the glory comes from the understanding of the process itself. And I know I'm sounding like Jay right here, but if the quote, the value is not necessarily in the fruit. Yeah, I know. This is becoming very philosophical.
Oh, but that's what it comes down to. That's what I was saying. How many people are willing? So when we're doing with our neighborhoods and stuff, we're trying to figure out how people want to gather and bring, their energy and feel some kind of source of what they're pushing it to. I mean, that's just kind of a human phase of you want to see, again, the fruition of your fruits. So, and that's what we need to like target and peel at. That fact that you're doing something that is so much greater than you, and it's preached all the time about that is bigger than us.
Yeah.
But that's literally the foundation of things, because it's really you're doing something that you may not experience, but this is going to be for your great grandkids. It's going to be able to have this opportunity. And that's one of the things that I've been able to experience and see as far as our family and our culture, and again, just oppressed people. That's literally the hardest thing. So that's why, faith, religion always been so prominent, because that's something that's having to be installed into people, knowing that you're not going to be able to see, experience, or feel everything that you want at this time. It's like we was talking about earlier, everybody gets the cake, but they don't never get the ingredients.
But to get to that practice, it has to be born out of transformation.
Absolutely.
We got to transform how we see ourselves, how we think, our values. Because even when we don't know it, we're practicing and thinking in a capitalist framework, because we're taught to get it the best way you can. Do what you got to do. I mean, those all are individual things. And even when you're like helping people, shit, I ain't benefiting from that. Right. I ain't making $1 from that. I mean, because this is intrinsically has been instilled in us, which actually works to our counterproductive of our community. Because then, fundamentally, to your point, when you don't have Jay, hey brother, can I get that haircut? But when I wasn't meeting you equally, it is what it is. But when I need you, hey, can I get your haircut? Which you probably don't have a problem doing it, but it's where's the reverse investment?
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah. So money is typically a tool to get something, right? And we typically have a desire to get the money, right? To get something. So earlier I talked about when we put processes in front of what I believe is, right? So the analogy I used was walking. I don't think you hope to walk. I think you just do it, right? So I think if we can get intimate with our end goal and stop spending so much time with our hurdles, we'll be a better people. But oftentimes people exercise poverty. I can't, I need, I wish, only if and then statements, right? All damage your efficiency to me. Y'all got that? So I think if we are in alignment and we are creating, we are causing the matter. So I don't think we have to question much, because we are in the action of. Yeah. So that's okay. Will she be heard if she asks it without the mic?
She's gonna need to ask the question with the mic, and then you're gonna need to get it back.
I'm not coming for anyone tonight. Just have a question. So, how did you receive that mindset that language is very important to creating? How did you receive that mindset?
You want to ask something else right now? Okay. Oh, man. So I just was on Detroit is Different podcast. And I'd love for you to kind of check it out and, get a clear understanding from your perspective, what you think. How I answer that question on the podcast is exactly how I'm going to answer it now. I came here this way, right? So oftentimes people are underneath the thought of that they have been molded and shaped into being a human, right? So I believe I came here this way, but to help out a person that's requiring understanding, right? If you exercise poverty, you get more of it. You can understand it, you get emotionally attached to it. And if I share with you that you don't have to live that way, you will argue with me about that process. So I just choose, because each time you open your mouth, you have a choice to either build or destroy. I believe both are necessary, right? I just choose to build. You got that? So you got another question.
So you're saying from birth, when you were a toddler, adolescent, nothing happened in your life to influence you to think positively about what you can do as a human in this world?
So I like how you asked me the question and then you motioned me to answer it a certain way. So I like that. So I'm led to say this. They said that I was born 1979. They said that I was a boy. They said that my name is Harlan J. Bivens. Do you understand the framework now? So they will always say a lot about your life. For me to be able to clearly identify a moment that caused something that you have noticed to happen, I don't think that I could effectively do that. You got that part? Okay. Just like you don't know the impact that's taking place at this very moment that's causing something for us to develop and grow from this situation and other people that's viewing it. Do you get that? Yeah. So there is no logical way that I'm aware of to identify how you can capsulize a scenario and or situation to suggest what you are worth or what you are. The term "you are powerful beyond measure" means just that. You cannot measure it. And I believe in the base of that question, it is a metric that you're hoping to be able to get some type of measurement from. Is that about accurate?
Yeah, it's definitely gotten more deep and more philosophical. Which I think the reality is, it's through the lens of capitalism and in America. The personal disposition and philosophy I may have about whatever that state of existence, like the concept of being imprisoned, but still mentally being in another space through meditation, and it's many things that can transfix it. The society and the design of the society that we stay in, and the basis and the premise of this society that we stay in, that we base in under capitalism, does face the have not, poverty to exist in this state. I believe that when we think of the resources and how they exist and how they transfer, this is an important discussion, because being in the American sphere, how we engage and how we can raise our quality of life collectively is very important. And we need to be very intentional about making sure that it is equity amongst raising that quality of life. So in this takes many approaches, and many of those approaches about how we connect as neighbors is very important, but along with how we connect as neighbors, that's important. The factors that are changing that quality of life does need to be exposed, needs to be recognized, and we need to be very aware of those things that are happening. And those things could be through philanthropy, through foundations, through government. It could be through some of the other community organizations that have aligned themselves against the better quality of life interest of the greater good of our community. All of this does take part. So as much as I think, like, I personally can transfix some of those conditions, I physically and sometimes emotionally can't even shake it. These are realisms. You know, as he said, I went to Northwestern, but I am the alumni president of Northwestern High School. Very aware of what Ford Motor Company has done, and it started as Ford Motor Company, but Ford Motor Company is kind of enacting as a wing of doing some good community work for some of the less than inclusive practices, and definitely not community-led practices, of Henry Ford Hospital. And that has been for generations what Henry Ford Hospital has stood at. So this is a reality, I think, to me, and that reality that does exist, knowing that, being connected to Northwestern, you know, and even some of its hiring practices, the way that it may treat some of the people, the development that takes place, this is real. And this real life can be the way that people lose their homes. People losing homes changes the way a person sees themselves. You know, a home is representative of so many things. So I know Yusef wanted to add to this piece too.
I'm just gonna say there's different levels of poverty, right? And when you tie into race, it even gets deeper. Right? There's black poverty, there's white poverty, and then there's another level of white poverty. And it's much deeper than just the mindset. Right? We can say those things, and it does become that, but it becomes that because it's the same thing with our ancestors, right? Who was kidnapped, brought to America. Those first generation of Africans, they was looking for Jesus, and not the Jesus that's in the church, the boat Jesus. They trying to get back to Africa, but over periods of time, their reality changed. Not because they wanted to, but because of the conditions. Again, in all of our education, we know now there's things that has been designed psychologically. Psychologically, they say you paint a room a certain way. Psychologically, if you design a room a certain way, your body, your mind will respond a certain way. So what do you think someone who's been living in poverty, surviving in poverty for so long? I mean, when you think about dilapidation, that human spirit becomes dilapidated. That mind becomes dilapidated. That badness that they see, they feel abandoned. When you are going places and people are treating you a certain way, over periods of time, I feel that way. And to drive that point home, when we think about gender and what women go through, and understanding the domestic violence, you're like, if it was me, I'd just leave. Well, it ain't that damn simple. You know, you've been conditioned to depend on this man, on that circumstance. So imagine for a group of people, a nation of people, for 400 years, have been conditioned to depend on a system that they know is going to mess over them, but I don't know where else to begin.
Yeah, Yusef definitely spoke to something that I wholeheartedly concur. Some of it on a personal level can be very philosophical, and it can be something that one person can transfix, but the physical conditions of it, it's real. Like when I look at the, you know, these 50, 60 year urban plans, and even the premise of this, as I go back to where I began too, like the design of a lot of this is intentionally set up where it only really will be understood and easy to follow for a limited few that are not connected to my community. And then when you are connected to my community to speak this language, you've already been indoctrinated in another system that's outside of what we're culturally indoctrinated in. It's the concept of so many things in our community that never were truly designed for us. And these things really need to be designed for us to succeed. So here are some of my ideas, as I've been asking Yusef a lot of questions most of the time. I think for my first question, in what ways should philanthropists, let's start with philanthropists first. When I think of philanthropists, I usually think that that's one person. Usually that one person may extend to a foundation. But how can a philanthropist support community development and build neighborhoods and be a part of building that neighborhood? I believe that the first thing is ego. The work needs to start disconnecting ego. A lot of philanthropists need to just say to themselves, instead of necessarily having a vision that they think will help and how it will help, that philanthropist needs to feel a certain way and say to themselves, I am going to be intentional about how I'm going to be in this community. Instead of that, I need to be intentional about finding out who is in this community and making sure that I let them decide. And if the resource I have is money, if the resource I have is automobiles, if the resource I have is property, I need to hand that over. The story that Yusef said about this home is the way that I believe a philanthropist can be very intentional about supporting a community. Get it out the way. Let the people there decide. And whatever that resource is, instead of coming up with weird criteria, it's not American Gladiators, you know what I'm saying? Can you do this pitch competition? Send in a video. Do you got a lawyer on your team? And what's your 10-year plan? Do you have a business plan? And what's your architect? What's your blueprint? It's like, no, let the people figure it out. And if the people take that 10 million, 1 billion, $100 billion and don't use it to what you feel like it's effectively, that's not even really your critique to make, because however it's used, it's really not for your critique. If that person takes the money and burns it in the barbecue pit, if you're really being intentional, it's not about, really helping. You know what I'm saying? It's the same way if you call me and ask me for some money, and then I say, well, you'd be like, let me get $20. I need to go grocery shopping. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to Kroger. I'm going to go with you. And then I'm going to pick out your groceries for you. I'm not really assisting you right now. I'm being very judgmental. I'm being very petty, and I'm being very immature about how I deliver that. That's step one. Philanthropists should step out the way. Whatever resource they got to give, find who's in the community, give it to them. That's step one, I believe. For a foundation, it's similar, but the first thing that a foundation needs to ask itself is, why do they have such a vision in the first place? Foundations aren't necessarily, a lot of the foundations that are buying into the community development of Detroit, these are multi-million-dollar businesses, hiring urban planners, hiring so many teams, basically spending, almost like spending $100,000 to figure out how to give $100 to this Detroit community. That already is a backwards process. Why are you a foundation in the first place? And does the idea of ego, going back to ego, matter a whole lot more than the actual work you plan on doing? And that's very important when it comes to the foundation. So an analysis of every foundation as far as why they have all these, the employment, why they have the process, why are they a foundation in the first place? If they want to be present in a community as a foundation, why not just strip things down and go back to that philanthropist? Why can't that person with whatever that resource is, property, vehicles or technology or money itself, just give it away themselves? You don't need a premise or a design for this. Be willing to step away. Now, in reference to government, I actually do think government should be held more accountable when it comes to this. I believe that the role government should play, especially if we're talking about HUD, government more so than anything should have the community benefit ordinance in effect. And when I say the community benefit ordinance, maybe like a changeover of residents that have been there the longest, and not even necessarily an elected people. And if that resident that's those residents that have held tenure the longest, and then maybe some of the residents that have just moved into a neighborhood should all decide and have votes upon how money is doled out and how these government agencies engage and interact with the community. The premise should definitely be built upon those people that live there, and that voice should be very strong. And really, the accountability when it comes to those elected officials and those politicians, scorecards need to be given, and with that scorecard, this may need to impact their own livelihood. Maybe how much these politicians get paid, maybe the access to the budgeting that they have, maybe the access to the campaigning that they have, because I don't even know if their job money really matters. Maybe it needs to be some way that campaign funding and the inclusion of residents involved in community development need to be hand in hand together. And that kind of goes into how do you hold these people accountable. I think campaign funding is how you hold many of the government officials accountable. And when it comes to philanthropists and foundations, which I believe a lot of that money is probably already rooted in God knows what weird business practices, I think the more process they have, the less of a tax shelter their organization should be. So the more staff they have, the more contracting they have, the more of all the build out and design they have outside of actually giving resources to a community, they should get less of a tax shelter connected to that.
My question to all of that is, when we was asking, when you were saying, like, you know, what's the plan, what's the blueprint? Remember you was referring to that? Why do you think they asked those questions? Because you spoke of the indoctrination. So, man, that's really kind of the answer, a little bit of the indoctrination. But my question to you is guess, what are some ways and values or resources we can use to combat indoctrination?
Well, things like this right now, open forums, information is key. Propaganda is one of the most key elements in warfare, in leading people to ignorance. So open, inclusive communication in forums like this, I definitely think help. I think also, when I was asking about the plan and the vision to Yusef, is the community making its own plan. So just sometimes recognizing what's happening, you know. Like right now, even in this room, you know, it's we see people using devices, you know, so that naturally just from looking, it's like, okay, so it's a place and space for some form of devices to exist. What are the ways that we can be inclusive in this community, deciding how to dole out support for these devices? And that's one of the youngest people in the room, and some of the oldest people in the room, the teens in the room. Like, the device is in use. So how do we empower our community around that? If we're looking at this itself as our own neighborhood itself, like, that's kind of how it needs to be driven. We need to be thinking like, all right, by being here, what do we see? What do we acknowledge? What's the reality here already? So some of that vision is the conversation, and then it's also the observation, and it's the reality of being there. We know we're there. We know what it's like. Right now, if you live in any neighborhood like mine, and obviously Yusef Street a little bit bigger, but close to mine, my street's not plowed. You know what I mean? So when you live in the side street, it's just an understood norm nowadays, where if it's a snowstorm and you live on the side street, you won't have your snow plowed, right? And then if we do have snowplow, people park on the street. How do you deal with that? Or people with snow blowers? Like, I mean, it's things that we can look at, you know. I think that can be very instrumental in the change of how our community functions. We just have to be very present for building that vision and know what our strengths are in playing that role.
That's what I was waiting for you to get to. Why you don't think we have that presence?
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point. Why you think that presence? Because, I mean, watching our people, we're all about see. We do a lot of see as far as, you know, vision stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But our culture, community is afraid to say.
Mm-hmm.
Because unfortunately we still have the demographic and the mindset of things that we say gets us killed.
I think there are a lot of people putting the work in. I would say what Yusef's doing, what I'm doing, some of the stuff Jay's doing. It's many people, but it's just definitely not going to be the banner that's waved, because, like I say, propaganda is a strong tool, and a lot of what I can figure, you know, and I consume it sometimes. Like, the ignorance is something that we've been more conditioned to consume. So discussions like this don't have the fanfare. And even like what Yusef said, if Kresge was holding this discussion, it would definitely be a packed room, because people would place a dollar value to being present at that. But that's what I think actually adds to the value of this discussion, because that means that everyone that came to this discussion actually had a stronger presence of mind of being here on their own volition, as opposed to an expectation of what someone outside the community can give them. So with that, we get into a close. We'll definitely pick this discussion up. And I'm looking forward to part 2. I'm pretty sure we're going to have it sometime in the spring. I'm going to post this on Detroit is Different. If you're not a part of Detroit is Different, hang back for a second. I'm going to get your email address, and I'm going to definitely be sending that to you very soon. Probably not this week, but next week. Thank you.
Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.